that too much?
Okay, you're gonna have to hit a button that says you're being streamed to our YouTube page. This is just gonna go on the Facebooks for the people who in the WoW group that might be interested. Okay. Oh, there it is again. Did you hear that?
I heard a little buzz.
Same thing happened last time, and I thought I was going crazy. Do you remember what happened? Nancy, do you remember what happened? I forgot to mute the video that is playing on YouTube because it pops up and it says everything that I just said or you just said again to me, but in like the 5-second delay or whatever. So it took me less than like 5 minutes to figure this out this week. So that feels like progress.
Okay.
Just saying. All right, big picture, Esther, here we go. I don't have Esther in front of me because I want to talk about it as a book. And if we have specifics that we want to get into, I think that is totally fantastical. But you can ask any questions you might along the way. But here's some things that I would like to offer up for us to think about for a little while about Esther. One is that it's a helpful question just to back up always and ask like the big picture questions about why something made it into the canon, right? Why was this included at all? Esther is another one of those, and I feel like we've been coming up on them rather frequently, where we're fairly certain that Esther is call it mythological in nature, right? We needed an origin story for Purim and a celebration of being in exile and not being murdered, right? I don't know if Kelly kept the line in that sermon, but Rabbi Jeff always says that pretty much every Jewish holiday is a recapitulation of they tried to kill us, they failed, let's eat. So here again, we have a reflection upon what it's like to be in exile. And it's similar in a lot of ways to Daniel, which again is kind of lands in the sort of mythological true myth area of the Bible. But it's a struggle, right? A definite struggle, but the Jews end up on top somehow, right? Daniel's is less dramatic, I think, even with the lions and the fiery furnace, less dramatic in the poetic sense, I guess, than Esther, where there's a very clear, bad guy, so to speak, and there is a pretty clear, Haman is trying to exterminate the Jews, but flip the script and Haman gets hanged on the gallows that were prepared for Mordecai. That kind of deal, right? Wow, what a reversal of fortunes. But at the same time, how that happens is really interesting to me in Esther, because I don't know. Well, I'll just say this. I'm not sure that most of us have been in a position in our lives to like really appreciate Esther. A minority who has to hide their identity for fear of their lives, and then makes their way makes their way on top. I, how much? I don't know. How much? I mean, there's certainly like, I mean, we spent an entire Lent on Esther 2 years ago, right? So clearly, I think that there are things that we can learn from Esther. However, in terms of like who these stories were written to, it to begin with, look so much unlike our lives. Which is to say that it looks a lot like somebody else's life, right? Like I think as I was reflecting upon Esther, I thought I was going to go a completely different way with Esther, because to me one of the big lessons of Esther that that's sort of perennial is like the always faithful God who isn't named but is very present, right? Because like, how do you get an Esther without a community and a set of practices that make a person like Esther, who can step up to bat when she needs to step up to bat, right? But so you've got the always present, always faithful God, and then you've got these moments of quick-wittedness. You've got moments of courage in the text by a handful of different people. That's all sort of like very timely, right? And very, I mean, kind of tricky, right? Like, it reminds me of Brer Rabbit. You know these stories?
Could the book of Esther be to the Old Testament like the Sermon on the Mount is to the New Testament?
The Sermon on the, I mean, I think that Esther is to the Old Testament. Jesus is telling the disciples that they've got to be innocent as doves and wise as serpents.
And perhaps having compassion on marginalized people.
For sure, right? But like, that's what we have to do with it, because like being a Christian in America is not a marginalized position, right? So,
it's becoming more.
For well, in the face of, I mean, well, we can have that conversation, but like, I think you look at Esther and you look at how she sort of makes her way and picks her moment and hides her identity so that she can get in, like, so that she can be saved, and hopefully make some good. And I think that's sort of the danger of being a person in the majority reading the text, is we're like, okay, so we can we can be tricksy about it to make our own benefit. Does that make sense? But we're not in the same vulnerable position as the initial readers would have been. We're not in the same vulnerable position that Esther was. So it can give license, I think, where license is not due. At the same time, I hope that, to your point, Tom, that it should make us, we who are in the majority in America, white, middle class, although being in middle class is probably not the majority in America. I'm not sure how the numbers stack out on that one. And Christian, and it should probably make us a soften to the experience of being a minority in a strange place like exile, and the ways that sometimes tricksy things have to happen to get progress out from the bottom, right? Like, I mean, that's the wisdom. I mean, I think this is why that it reminds me of Brer Rabbit, right? Like the tricksy little devil does what he has to do to save his own hide or to make things come up roses for him because he doesn't have any other option, right? He can't trust that it's just going to work out for him. He's a rabbit. He has no way to defend himself. He's got floppy, adorable ears and he can run fast. That's not a great strategy against a fox or a bear, right? And so he has to use what he's got at hand. Yeah, I don't want to. I know people have very strong feelings about the riots and the Black Lives Matter movement of 2 years ago. But I think for me, I want to look at those things that were happening, even in their most violent stages, where like we're burning down targets, and I of course am like, well, that's not. I don't know if you'd call that morally right. And at the same time, I think to myself, well, I'm not sure what other voice they can give to their concerns except for to use the tools that are at hand, right? If nothing else is going to work for them, then they pick up a lighter and set fire to a target that is like for sure insured, right? You know, like nobody died in that building. That'd be a different thing. But yeah, it makes me wonder what the view from God's however many feet, 0. That's the answer to that question. Like, what is the God's eye view of this, given the sort of stories that we see in the Old Testament? And it's not just Esther. You know, it's Abraham trying to pass Sarah off as his sister. It's Jacob, pretty much all of Jacob's story, the whole thing, like from the get to the day he dies, pretty much, right? Like his last act is to switch the blessing on his grandsons, you know. So it really is something that Esther is just another one of those stories. But if and it happens where the Israelites are so disempowered, right, that it makes me think about what happens when people who are disempowered act in ways that we would otherwise look down our noses at. What do you think? Do you think you can read Esther like that into the current context, or is that a stretch too far?
I can see some difficulties there, but I can definitely try.
Well, we voted today, and that's one way we let our voice be known. But sometimes I wonder if that's enough. You know, when we have principalities and powers that get elected, and then they seem to think only about themselves and about getting reelected again instead of really serving people.
Right.
And, I think sometimes as a voter, I feel marginalized. I feel like, what's the sense?
Yeah.
And yet I know to not vote is a worse thing for me. But you just keep on keeping on. You'll think, are we making progress? as a nation?
Not currently.
Do we need to take a vote? Do we have to take a vote on that?
Can't we take a vote?
That's almost a rhetorical question.
Yeah, right. What's up, Dave?
I would have to say, I feel frustrated because, Lord, forgive me. In our country now, and in the Christian church, I feel A, determined, but B, marginalized. That seems to me, and I hope people can prove me wrong, that the overall message of the Church of, quote, Jesus Christ is so skewed from what we're learning more and more about what Jesus really said and what he wanted, that, for instance, this is an easy question to be answered in the next 20 years. It goes back to Jesus said, don't stand against your oppressors. Way back there in that Sermon on the Mount, right? That means don't make war with your oppressors. And from my understanding in the history, the little band of Christians, they didn't. But then they got tempted by Constantine, and they became the state, the state religion. And we've been just as damn violent as anybody else. In fact, maybe worse so. It's all in the name of Jesus. And yet it seems like we gave up on that. I don't know. And for me personally, and it's something I don't know how to work it out. Well, I do. You do the best you can. But how do you stay faithful to that when all of our country, we do have more bombs and more weapons and more this and that, more that. And I don't know how many, I wonder what the majority or what percentage of the, quote, Church of Jesus, the followers of Jesus, how many of them believe that we should follow Jesus in not fighting against our oppressors.
But
Do we just give that up?
I think that really is pertinent today when 7,000 more Russians are at the Ukraine border, and the Russians are saying we're withdrawing troops, but they're lying. So how do you deal with that?
Easy questions. Well, just let me follow Tom for a minute. If you say, and I understand why people say this, hey, we got to get arms in there. We got to do this. We got to use our military might. Maybe that's the right thing, but not for me. I just am not comfortable with it. I haven't been comfortable with it since I was, since Vietnam. Since I did serve, but I got lucky and didn't have to go to Vietnam. But then if they go in, prayers and best wishes don't help. Thank God we have at least some choices with economic boycotts. But that's a personal dilemma for me, and I feel alienated because I think the position that I think many of us in that Trinity, they may not share my entire position, but I think just those who struggle with what does it mean to follow Jesus, man, we're between a rock and a hard place most of the time. Because a lot of the church says, come on, that's garbage, that's naive. They even said that at seminary. Even Pittsburgh Seminary, the great bastion of knowledge in theological training. They said that in '83 when I was there. Oh no, he just put that in there to show that following me is impossible. You'll need to be forgiven.
Maybe we're between a rock and a cross.
Oh man, well, I really like that. We should talk sometime. That we will with the book. Anyway, I'm just expressing, and I may be the only one, but chances are I'm not.
No, I hear you.
You know, sometimes when you get two little kids, they get in a fight and they start a shouting match. Until someone stops, it just gets louder and louder. Or if they start hitting each other, it just gets worse and worse until a parent intercedes. And sometimes I just wonder if nations don't act like little kids. And they go to war, and you have a dialectic in the Old Testament. You got one place where it says, you know, take your swords and make them into pruning hooks, and you got another place that's just the opposite. And so it's a tension that we feel.
We are coming up on the end of the Old Testament next week. And I think that Israel, and we can talk about this next week, we likely will, but I think that Israel feels the tension of the prophetic hope of something new, right? Of something unlike what they've known, the turn your spears into pruning hooks, and the Lord is going to draw all nations to Jerusalem, and this is going to be a house of prayer for all people. And the Lord is going to make a name better than sons and daughters for the eunuchs and all those foreigners who draw unto him, right? Like, they feel the tension at the close of the New Testament of the prophetic hope and what they've actually lived into, which is something completely different.
Weren't they looking for a Messiah who would be an earthly king that would take all of Israel's enemies and bring them to their knees?
It seems like maybe they were giving up on that notion toward the end, because if they were, well, Rabbi Jeff will tell you that that Reformed Jews are no longer looking for a single individual Messiah. He thinks they believe that everybody is the Messiah. Like, you are the Messiah. It is your job to change the world. And he says that because he's like, given the numbers of Jews around the time of Solomon, the chances are that we are all actually descendants of David, because of how many wives and concubines Solomon had. So he says that like sort of kind of tongue in cheek, but I think that's actually legit. But because, and the reason I say that, Tom, is because if they were going to look for somebody to throw into a messiahship role, Zerubbabel would have probably been their guy, the new governor of Jerusalem when they came back from exile. He kind of leads the charge. There was a lot of energy behind him, but his projects are frustrated. Like, all of their projects are frustrated. Ezra, Nehemiah, Zerubbabel, all of their projects are frustrated, and I think it is. Man, I was writing my sermon today, so I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, as I want to do, and I think it is because all of them revert to what has been rather than what could be, right? Zerubbabel or Nehemiah is trying to build the walls, and Zerubbabel is trying to build the temple, and both of them are approached by people. Hey, can we help? Some of them could be Jews that were left over that had intermarried with other people. Some of them could have been just straight up foreigners who were living in the land now. Hey, can we help you rebuild? And that is a hard no both times. Absolutely not. You'll have, Nehemiah says it direct, you will have no part in this city of David. No part. And it's like, here's your chances, guys. Right? Here is your opportunity to live into the new thing that God has been prophesying to you for so many years about what could be. And if you ever had a great opportunity to start over again, now is it. However, the reason I said all that is to say this, that the draw of nationalism and drawing hard boundaries around ourselves is strong, right? Like I think it was very much the hope of the prophets that Jerusalem and Israel could be a place for all people, and that all people could rally around the worship of the one true God, and that all the nations could, as Revelation says, all the nations could bring their gifts into the city, right? But when those other nations who have gathered already around want to help with the project, the answer is no. Get out of here. We're going to do it ourselves. This is ours. This is our identity as this specific people. It's really hard to let go, which pits us always against one another, right? I think that's the beauty of Jesus, right? Who melds not only God and humanity together, but also is this Middle Eastern Jew who has this sense of like, never met somebody he didn't like unless that person was somebody that would put up boundaries, right? And then he's like, no, wrong, right? But everybody else, sinner, foreigner, doesn't matter. He's like, yes, let's be friends. He has this intensely other-minded way of being that really destroys this sense of got to rally around this thing to protect it, which necessarily puts us in these positions where we're pitted against one another, minority, majority, insider, outsider. And it feels to me that what Jesus is really trying to do is to put that to an end.
When he showed a somewhat violent streak, when he overturned the tables and let the animals out, the sacrifices, was that an act of just a symbol, an act of a symbol more than a violent streak witin him? Because it seems is disingenuous with some of the stuff that he says in the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the peacemakers.
I mean, certainly a symbolic act, but also like that was Jesus's burning of a target, not to bring Target back up, but like, I mean, that's a property crime, right? Like that. No, he wasn't hurting anybody. Nobody died when Jesus flipped over the tables, except for that people lost some money, which was the very thing that they were worshiping, which was the problem in the first place. Right. So he's like, let me show you what the ends of your worship are. They can get out of their cages and fly away. Okay. You're dubs. But yeah, I mean, sure. I think it's highly symbolic.
Black Lives Matter demonstrations, protests.
Well, I'm not going to make a one-to-one correlation between Jesus and the Black Lives Matter. I'm just saying that I think that some of the things that Jesus does, that Esther does, help us to see the plight of the minority a whole lot better, because they were the minority. They remain the minority, by the way, and we are not, which means that I necessarily have to say, well, maybe I don't understand what this is like. Apparently, our stated clerk said something recently of the Peace USA that has been deemed anti-Semitic. I'm not exactly sure what it was, but I think that pretty much what it boiled down to was, or my take on it anyway, is that he was condemning the state of Israel for some new destruction of Palestinian territory and homes, and conflated I think he said something to the effect of that the Jewish community needs to do better, which I agree with, but it wasn't the Jewish community acting, it was the state of Israel, right? Which, again, to a point that I was making earlier about our nationalistic ends, you want to get people to fight with each other, tell them they have to defend something, and that it is theirs only if they defend it. Bye. But yeah, I mean, it's I would imagine that if that part hadn't been in his statement, that it wouldn't have been a big deal at all. If he hadn't conflated Jewish people with the state of Israel, then it wouldn't have been a big deal, because GA has said, hey, Israel, you should not, bulldoze land in Palestine that does not belong to you. That's kind of a reasonable thing to say, I think. Seems to me, anyway. Yeah. Want to talk about just interesting things about the text? Talk about Vashti for a second, who is the queen that Ahasuerus deposes prior to his need to find another queen in Esther. So the reason that she gets deposed is because she refuses to come and dance for I'm just going to call him Xerxes because that's easier to say, and that's likely who they're trying to make him out to be. She won't come and dance for Xerxes and his friends at this party that has raged for 187 days. That's right. It was a 6-month-long party, and at the end of 6 months, he decided to throw another party for a smaller group of people, and it was on the 7th day of that party that he asks Vashti to come out. So he's been on essentially a 6-month bender, and it's a miracle that he's even alive at this point. And she refuses to come out. Now, I think that Vashti probably is also an example that we're supposed to take from Esther, as sort of like some female or feminist scholars call Vashti like the world's first feminist, because she wouldn't come and dance. I mean, the text seems to make it look like Xerxes wants her to come dance nude, because it says to dance in the crown, and that's it, right? So no self-respecting woman wants to come dance for her ogling drunken husband and his drunk friends. However, the midrash on this is hysterical. Apparently, Vashti was not known to be a person of like deep character in the midrash. Anyway, like I said, we don't really have any actual historical evidence of any of this, so it's all just sort of thoughts on the text. And so there's a thought that Vashti didn't come, and she had also taken hostage all of these other women in case one of the kings that were partying with her husband tried to make a move so that she would have hostages. Weird. Here's the best one. Because Vashti was a person of ill repute, the reason that she wouldn't come out and dance naked is because an angel had given her a penis. That's a true story. Now, I don't know that that's actually true, but that is what one of the commentaries, one of the Jewish commentaries on this, like ancient, right, several thousand years old, they think, yes, the reason that Vashti wouldn't come is because an angel had come down and pinned a penis on her, and she was embarrassed of it. So that's why she wouldn't dance.
That complicates the story a little bit.
I mean, I wish that was it, because, and that had made it into the scripture, because that would have been up there, top 10 verses that I would have memorized as a young boy, because it was hilarious. That's for sure.
We would
Would
have
that
said
have made that was included?
They were the talking jackass, doesn't it?
Yeah.
This is
Yeah, but
this is a
Oh.
question not with that, but sometime I'd like you to comment on the criteria that they used to make a book or a letter in the canon.
we could talk about canonization anytime.
Yeah,
Probably not in the next 8 minutes, but
I know that. I think that's helpful,
yeah,
and
for
especially
sure.
reference to Esther. That doesn't talk about God, but there are theological concepts involved in it.
Yes.
if you elevate the Vashti to the position of importance at which you've just done a little, then you have two female characters of pretty great strength. One who was told, "You will do this," and she said, "Nope, wouldn't be prudent."
Yeah.
Right? And then
Yeah.
you have the queen. They said, "You shouldn't do this," and she went, "Yes, I am."
Hold my beer.
Huh?
Said, hold my beer. Watch this.
Hold my beer. Watch this. Yeah, two women of pretty great strength doing different things, and I don't know if they believed that the Lord was with Vashti, but she got killed, didn't she?
We don't know. She got deposed, which probably means she got killed, but it doesn't say it outright.
Yeah. So that's what struck me. Okay, I wonder if is that part of it. Might that be part of why the whole story is in the Hebrew scriptures? There's two women, one's strong, or who relied on the Lord for strength. One was told, one said no and to her demise probably, and one said yes and saved. Anyway.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think other than background to why the king needs a new queen and how Esther wiggles her way into the the castle, so to speak. You can come up with any number of reasons or any number of ways how that happens. You don't necessarily need to create a story in which there is a woman who doesn't have a whole lot of resources doesn't have a whole lot of formal power to wield, but finds a way to be courageous anyway, right? And to wield it anyway. That's why I kind of like Vashti as cunning and keeping these women back as sort of insurance against her husband and his drunken friends acting foolish, because it would be just another way that somebody with a little power used whatever maneuvers they could to ensure their own survival, right? Which is very much in tune with the rest of the book. So it's like Esther to me feels like God's people, not God's people, doesn't really matter. It's okay to be scrappy when you don't have formal power to wield. Like when nobody is looking out for you, like God's eye is on the little guy or girl in this case.
His eye is on the sparrow.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Anyway,
Well,
does anybody,
came up totally.
did anybody else have any questions about Esther in particular, like verses that or things that didn't make sense, or questions you had about the text? I know that today was kind of more of a broad conversation about the book as a whole, which is not my normal, but it's such a short book that I thought an overview would maybe be better
So,
than digging into details.
is there no historical record of this king with a kingdom that vast?
Well, they put this in the time of exile, and we think that the king that they meant is Xerxes.
Okay. They just
What you got
changed-
there, Paul? Ice cream bar. Good call.
I think it's interesting. You spoke earlier of the canonization process, and my understanding is that it was largely councils of men. And so I do think it's interesting that they did find it prudent or whatever to include Esther, the book of Esther. It's an exception because I kind of think that Christianity got masculinized when, like Dave said earlier, when it got taken over by Constantine, and the early church that had many women of good character in it was trivialized, and that's part of that. So yeah, that's kind of my overall comment about Esther and the canonization we talked about.
Yeah.
A miracle for that it was Esther and Ruth and Hagar.
You know, in the New Testament we have, and this doesn't really work for the Old Testament because of the interests for inclusion were different. But in the New Testament we have something called the criterion of embarrassment. So if something in the text is embarrassing and is something you would otherwise want to hide, then that is a mark on the positive side for its legitimacy as historical, because why else would you include it, right? So for instance, that Mary is the first to see the risen Christ, and that she is the one that goes to tell the disciples that the Lord is risen, is one of those kinds of things. Because if you wanted to prove the point, right, if Jesus in fact did not rise from the dead, and you wanted to prove the point that and you were trying to make the case that he did, but you were just making it up, you wouldn't want it to be a woman who discovered him alive and went to tell the men. You'd put those words in the mouth of Peter, right? Or John, or one of the top three disciples, right? Instead, we get Mary, which is something that you wouldn't have chosen. So why is that in there? Well, probably because that's how it happened, right? And so that's why it's included that way. But a similar thing is certainly at work, or a similar truth is at work. Like, why include Esther and Ruth as these heroines in the Old Testament? By the way, I've said this before. I feel like some of these things are ongoing reflections of mine, but I know the Old Testament can seem essentially anti-feminist, right? A little misogynistic at times. The Bible as a whole is actually doing pretty dadgum good given the world in which it existed. Like, that's the thing, is on the basis of 2022, it's doing a terrible job. But on the basis of 2022, so is 1956, right? Imagine 4,000 years or 3,500 years ago. Like, it's a big leap in time and history and human evolution. And so, like, the Bible is actually pretty hip and with it in a lot of ways. Is it modern? No, it's not. But because it is modern for its own time, it kind of gives us license to go ahead and be modern in ours in a lot of ways, in terms of trajectory. Like, what is God doing with the church? What is God doing through his people? How is he pushing us forward? Well, here are some ways that the church was ahead of the times. And now we catch up most of the time because we're scared. That's the long and the short of it. Terrified to displease God because something isn't in a Bible that hadn't had a page written in it for 2,000 years. So we stay married to a static past rather than a dynamic spirit-led future, which gets us a step back and rather than a step forward most of the time, unfortunately.
Is that what some literalists are they're afraid to move ahead?
Absolutely. I mean, I will tell you that, like, people that I know from, I mean, because I was that guy, right? My entire growing up, people would tell me, like, hey man, like, that gay stuff is sending you to hell. Like, you are leading people to hell. And I would say, thank you for telling me how you feel. I guess. There are lots of things in the Bible that you do that I'm not going to take you to task on, because I just think they're a product of their time. Does your wife wear gold jewelry to church? I bet she does. Apostle Paul says that's a no-no. Like a chapter away from where he talks, where you're telling me he sends all the gay people to hell. So, like, maybe you should think about the jewelry situation, right? Like, but if we're going to be firmly, like, if we're going to be so locked in, it's a place for fear. Or you just start Swiss cheesing the heck out of your Bible, right? And you're like, well, this matters, but this doesn't, and I have no reason to believe one of these things or not the other, just because I don't like it.
Isn't that what
doesn't fit?
Jefferson did with the divinity of Christ?
Yeah, he sure did.
And the
He sure did.
just cut him out.
Isn't that who? Who did that?
Thomas Jefferson.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Any other questions about Esther? I hate to keep you guys long. It's 7:34. But if you had a burning question.
But we
Thank
don't
you,
have
Frank.
to get out of the sanctuary tonight.
We don't. But I have children to put to bed tonight. So.
They need to go to their playroom.
That's right. No, they need to go to sleep. Their bedtime is like 15 minutes ago. We should be reading. Which one is that?
Oh,
Which dog?
This is Stavely.
Stavely has the white thing all the way up the face.
She's got the stripe.
Okay.
Beautiful.
She's a beautiful dog.
Linda's been here the whole time.
I've been going to church for 70 years now, and I've never, I can probably only, I almost never heard any Old Testament sermons until you came along. And I'm just so enjoying understanding why the Old Testament is relevant. I mean, really relevant.
Oh yeah.
Not just sort of, oh yeah, we better look at a couple of these stories.
You said that we're going to be out of the Old Testament, but I got a feeling it reverberates its way into the New Testament.
Yeah. But you would think I would have picked up a little bit more of this. Maybe about 10 years ago, I was still working, and Dave and I decided we were gonna read through the whole Bible. So we started at Genesis. Oh man, when we about halfway through the Old Testament, I just said, can we just skip to the New Testament? I don't get any of this. I just don't get it. And things were rough at work. I just didn't have the patience to even try to understand it. So I just want to thank you because, I'm learning a lot, finally.
And
I'm really enjoying it.
I'm such a help to her because I'm so optimistic about all that stuff.
I think that we should probably, like, everybody that tries to read the Bible by themselves, like as a project from start to finish, shouldn't be allowed to just read it the way that it's presented, because it's really tough, because it doesn't make sense that way. Like you wouldn't know unless you had some other help or did some research. Like, how would you ever know that Malachi was talking about the same, which is the last book in the Bible, right? How would you know that that is actually talking about the books that are kind of in the middle, like Ezra, Nehemiah, Chronicles ish time?
You wouldn't.
You'd have no idea, and you'd be like, what is this person talking about? Like, these are neat prophetic oracles, but like, what, to who, at when? Like, what is happening? So
Exactly.
yeah.
I remember when you first came, I remember you saying something like, oh, one of your seminary professors was talking about how important it is to keep going back and looking at the Old Testament. And I remember thinking, really? Oh, this is going to be interesting. So again, I just want to thank you for this whole project.
Well, I know I shared a couple of weeks ago that somebody sent me a note a few Sundays ago, and they said, I thought you were crazy when you told us what we were going to do this week, but I actually see it happening, right? It's I can understand the flow of it. So I'm glad. Thank you for sharing that, Beth. Okay. Well,
Go read the stories and sing the songs to those kids.
I'm gonna. We just finished the second Harry Potter book.
Woohoo!
And so we watched the second Harry Potter movie, and they kind of get scary from here. So we're gonna take a Harry Potter pause for a couple of years, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, good idea.
So now, but comparatively, what we're reading now is super lame. It's like this little chapter book of like Dragon Master or something. It's silly little the book, but
Dick and Jane confront original sin. Or something.
right. That's exactly right.
Have you done the Chronicles of Narnia?
I haven't. I do the Chronicles of Narnia for me like every other year.
Yeah.
But I haven't done it with them yet. I did. Elliot was with me. I can't remember. I was roasting coffee, I think it wasn't this weekend. It must have been last weekend. But I was sitting in the shed and I was roasting coffee, and he came out to say hi, and he was telling me he was bored, and I just so happened to have the Magician's Nephew sitting on my desk out there, and I was like, well, would you like me to read you a couple pages of this book? And he was like super into it. So maybe it is time. Although there are so many words that are like English, old Englishy kind of words, that he was like, what does that mean? And I was like, oh, it means dessert, or it means, whatever. It means pants or what have you. But anyhow, all right. Well, grace and peace to you, my friends.
Thank you.
We will see you sometime soon.
Thank
You
you.
betcha.
Get well.
Bye, everybody.
Thank
Good
you,
night.
Tom, for the book. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jake.
You betcha.